So today I want to talk about U.S. sponsored assassinations with recent tensions in Venezuela, Iran, and North Korea. It's important to discuss the U.S.'s long history of assassination attempts on foreign leaders and why the leaders of these countries are likely scared and very defensive because of the very, very long history of CIA aggression against foreign leaders. It makes it very difficult for the US to come to diplomatic solutions when we've so consistently resorted to violence in the past and broken diplomatic agreements. And I just want to note how horrible it really is that this kind of behavior that the US government has done over the years has really been normalized, and how if any other country on earth were to assassinate foreign leaders like we've done, or attempt to assassinate foreign leaders like the CIA has done, how we would treat those countries like the adversaries they should be. And some countries do this. I would say Russia probably similarly has attempted some assassinations on foreign leaders. That would not surprise me. Well, Russia slash the Soviet Union. I mean, obviously, there's other countries who have done many assassination attempts on their own countries and journalists, like recently Saudi Arabia murdering an American journalist Khashoggi, and Russia has murdered tons of journalists. Many journalists have been murdered in Mexico, not by the government, cartel and other horrible organizations. But the U.S. government itself is responsible for many assassinations of foreign leaders. I mean, it's directly goes against international law and international diplomacy. I mean, we just don't hold other nations to our own standards. So I think the best example of this is what the U.S. had done or has done to Fidel Castro, because between 1959 and 2000, the U.S. has attempted to assassinate Fidel Castro 638 times. That's the recorded number of times, at least. The CIA assassination attempts have included some really bizarre and kind of, stuff you would find in a James Bond movie. It's pretty insane, honestly. The US has tried to murder Fidel Castro with poisoned cigars. He was at some point an avid smoker. I think he gave it up. But we booby trapped a scuba diving suit. I mean, he liked scuba diving, so we thought we would kill him that way. We also sent him an exploding cigar. Again, he loved his cigars. And a ballpoint pen which would shoot poison at him. The last assassination attempt we made against Castro was as recent as 2000, which is honestly insane. Way past the Cold War. I mean, if you're going to make excuses for this behavior, it was the Cold War, Cuban Missile Crisis, whatever you want to make excuses for, we did this as recently as the year 2000, where the Soviet Union was a heap of ashes, okay? So in the year 2000, 90 kilograms, I know metric system, of explosives were placed under a podium in Panama where Castro was supposed to give a talk. Castro once said that if surviving assassination attempts were an Olympic event, I would win the gold medal. I think that's a funny quote, but it's pretty fucked up, honestly. I mean, I partially wanted to talk about this because of how crazy the stuff the CIA has used to try to assassinate Castro has been, and how badass Castro's been in avoiding all these assassination attempts. This also reminds me of Tito, who was the communist dictator of Yugoslavia back before Yugoslavia broke up in the 90s. Stalin tried to assassinate Tito. Stalin, the dictator of the Soviet Union, obviously, tried to assassinate Tito like many, many times because Tito ruled Yugoslavia as an independent, neutral communist nation who would not submit to the Soviet power. Okay, and Stalin didn't like that. He wanted only Soviet puppet states. He really saw them working with Western powers. So he tried to assassinate Tito. Well, so I guess there you go. There is an example of another nation doing it. But Stalin tried to assassinate Tito. So then Tito sent him a message back saying, "Do this again, and I'll send my own assassins, and I won't have to send another." So Tito, another badass in history, although obviously Tito Castro, very controversial figures. I'm not saying they were good people, I'm just saying particular aspects of them were pretty badass. But the real fucked up thing about these CIA assassinations were that they're done without any congressional authority. Because, of course, why would Congress need to be involved in assassinating a foreign leader? It's not like assassinating a foreign leader is an act of war and the war powers are completely vested in Congress, directly stated in the Constitution. That would make way too much sense. I mean, assassinating a foreign leader, it's just equivalent to like a minor strike or something. I mean, a president would never need congressional authority to do something like that. That would really limit their ability to conduct international diplomacy. I think that's what the media narrative would honestly be. But it's obviously a violation of international law to assassinate a foreign leader. But of course, international law doesn't apply to the US. The US is the law for all intents and purposes, since we are the morally righteous people by definition. And to think otherwise is quote unquote un-American. A lot of these evangelicalist Christians literally believe that America was created, in the image of God, kind of, as the holiest of nations whose job it is to westernize, aka Christianize the rest of the world, manifest destiny, that whole thing. And of course, all these assassination attempts of Fidel Castro, well, they happened before, but most of them happened after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And in the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was negotiated between Kennedy and Khrushchev that the U.S. would no longer pursue a regime change in Cuba. This is just one of many examples of the U.S. breaking its own agreements. Most noteworthy in recent history is Trump breaking the Iran deal that Obama negotiated with Iran to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons in exchange for sanction relief. This may be the most extreme example of U.S. assassinations and the most direct one, but there's a ton of examples throughout history. My favorite, of course, and I'll probably mention this over and over again, is in 1973 when the CIA helped overthrow the democratically elected left-wing president of Chile, Salvador Allende. He was murdered in a coup, completely backed by the CIA. This was done because a successful democratic socialist state could not be allowed to exist in fear that other nations would see Chile's success and follow in their lead. As recently as 2011, so this isn't an old phenomenon, but as recently as 2011, during the Arab Spring, under President Barack Obama, the U.S. backed the overthrow of, I'm just going to say Gaddafi, sorry about that, who was murdered by rebels and sodomized by a bayonet, of course, all backed by the U.S. Libya has since become a failed state and is one of the largest havens of extreme Islamic terrorism. There is now open slave trades there in the year 2019. Which, if you ask me, in my opinion, is a complete failure of mankind as a whole to allow slavery in the modern era. This is after Libya peacefully disarmed themselves in the year 2003, when Gaddafi agreed to end its nuclear weapons program in exchange for sanction relief. So very similar to the Iran deal, the U.S. just like 15 years later decided to do regime change against a nation that we had an agreement with. You hear John Bolton recently talking about the Libya model in places like Iran and North Korea. The Libya model meaning not meaning the nuclear agreement that took place. No, that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about the 2011 coup against them, where the leader of Libya was dragged onto the street and sodomized with a bayonet while he pleaded for his life. This was all on video. In fact, you could go watch it. I don't suggest you do, but if you want to, go right ahead. The history of assassination and coups, even after U.S. agreement, just makes it so incredibly difficult for any other nation to trust U.S. diplomacy. Trump broke Obama's promise with Iran, and that just further erodes the U.S.'s international credibility. We broke a promise with Iran, with Libya, and of course with Cuba after the Cuban Missile Crisis. So the U.S. doesn't really have any moral high ground to stand on when we're negotiating nuclear treaties around the world, because we've just broken them over and over and over again, or any kind of peace treaty, really. We don't respect our own international diplomacy. You know, all this may be by design, since the US has many times chosen to go to war instead of favoring diplomacy. Really, we must continue to push for diplomatic solutions in crises around the world, like in Venezuela, Iran, and North Korea right now. We need to do this before the CIA attempts more assassinations and more coups against foreign leaders. Let's hope for peace around the world, and that really we finally get some oversight against the CIA. It should not be up to the president and the leader of the CIA to determine which leaders live and which leaders die. We live in a world with a lot of countries who aren't the United States, and we need to start treating them like we want to be treated. Let's go back to kindergarten, to be honest with you. Can you imagine if, like, China right now just started trying to assassinate the US president or anything like that? I mean, it's just honestly a ridiculous thought. Yet no one thinks it's ridiculous that the US goes around the world assassinating other foreign leaders. I mean, we need to look at this as absolutely ridiculous and absolutely outrageous. So let's hope for peace. Have a good day, everyone.